Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about nutrition and the adolescent athlete, and I have no financial reimbursement has been received for any aspect related to the content of this presentation. So today we're going to discuss nutritional needs and concerns for the adolescent athlete, vitamin and mineral needs, as well as proper hydration and the effects of dehydration, some meal and snacks, as well as we'll touch a little bit on supplementation. So all athletes, but in particular, adolescent athletes need carbohydrate, proteins, and fats, as well as certain vitamins and minerals, hydration, and rest if they want to perform at their best. Carbohydrates are essential because they are really the most efficient form of energy for our body. They make us have the most power, they are the most readily available, and they are converted the quickest as well when we need that immediate energy. We have different types of carbohydrates, such as complex and simple. Simple is broken down very quickly, and there's a time and a place for that when we need something immediate, or when we're about to maybe bonk, when we're on a really long bike ride, and we need to take in something quick to kind of bring that blood sugar level back up and restock those carbohydrate stores. We also have complex carbohydrates, which are a little bit more slowly released into the bloodstream, and those help kind of stabilize blood sugar level. And we want to take those in all throughout the day too, because that keeps our carbohydrate stores, again, so we can be ready to perform at our best. Carbohydrate is also essential because it does actually hold water, and for the adolescent athlete, which we'll talk about, there is a real need for proper hydration. Kids run around more dehydrated than they don't. And so one of the benefits of carbohydrate is that it actually does hold 4 grams of water per gram of carbohydrate. So it does help as far as keeping everybody hydrated. Proteins are also essential for obvious reasons of helping us maintain our muscle mass, but also helps with our immunity too, and it does help fight infections. So, kids are getting sick all the time too, and when we put a lot of strain on our body, such as through athletics, their immune system is going to be tampered even more so. So it does help with that as well. Protein supplements are not always essential when we're working with an adolescent in particular. Again, the only time that I would ever recommend a child have a protein shake is if there is no other food available or it's a source of convenience. But that kind of goes along with the talk on supplementation, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Fats are also extremely important too, and they're more of the second source of fuel. So the body doesn't break down fats very efficiently for fuel. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of energy to do so. So they can't be immediately used, which is why carbohydrate is kind of that primary source. But if one is exercising for long periods of time, eventually fats can be utilized for energy. Fat's also important because it does aid in the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins as well. So we want to make sure that we're taking in really healthy sources of fat throughout the day. Smaller throughout the day is essentially what we want, so we can get that good absorption of those fat-soluble vitamins. It's also necessary for essential fatty acids, which is very necessary for growth, but in particular for decreasing inflammation within the body too. And so certain fats will help decrease inflammation, such as fats from avocado, nut butters, olive oil, coconut oil, that sort of thing. Those are great things to incorporate into a child's diet. Vitamins and minerals are very essential, obviously, especially for anyone, but in particular if you're working with a growing body. And so if you are taking in a balanced and varied diet, chances are you're going to get all of the nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that you need. But as we all know, when we're dealing with children, they don't necessarily like all the things that provide them with the best source of nutrition. Some myths about vitamins and minerals is that they can't cure a cold at all, that they should not be used to replace foods. So just because a child doesn't like their fruits and vegetables doesn't mean if you load them up on vitamins, it's going to do the same thing. It's not going to do the same thing. And the body actually doesn't utilize nutrients from vitamins quite as well as it does from food. So, you could take a multivitamin and see that as kind of an insurance policy, but it's not really going to do exactly the same thing that a fruit or a vegetable would do for a child. Some of these vitamins and minerals too, in some of the supplements you can find, are actually in more in higher levels than they should be, and therefore when you're giving that type of thing to a smaller body, there's more likelihood for possible toxicities. As far as specific nutrients are concerned, calcium and iron, zinc, vitamin A, vitamin C, E, and D are all very essential for the adolescent athlete. So as you can see, this is just kind of a list of foods that would contain all of the things that are very necessary. And so as I mentioned, if you are getting in a varied diet, chances are you're going to hit all of those numbers that you need. Calcium is incredibly essential because we are working on building bone mass at this point. And again, when we're putting a lot of stress on the body and a stress on the bones too, they're going to be a little bit more fragile. So we want to make sure that we're taking in enough calcium to support all of that. So adequate intakes for most are about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day. For any female athlete, we're looking at closer to 1,500 milligrams in a day. Again, this helps ward off any stress fracture. We also need vitamin D to supplement with that too, so that helps with the absorption of calcium as well. And we can find that in combination, in particular with dairy foods. Vitamin D is incredibly essential, and most of the time in regions such as where we live, we're not getting in enough vitamin D, or our vitamin D levels will vary, where they might climb a little bit in summer and then they'll drop again in winter, and which is usually when I find that I have the most stress fractures coming in. So it's really essential that if you are working with a younger athlete that you get their vitamin D status checked. Then we know how much to potentially supplement within the diet. Current recommendations state that about 2,000 IUs a day, and this is for everybody, that's just enough to maintain any present levels of vitamin D. So if we have to increase levels of vitamin D, we're looking at possibly supplementing between 5,000 to 10,000 IUs in a day. So it's good to kind of know where that base level is. And again, there's really strong evidence that if one is low in D, they have a much higher chance for stress fractures. Iron is also essential for both male and female adolescent athletes. The needs are greater for women, but really we're looking at about 10 grams a day for males and 18 grams a day for women. And so these sources can come from basically most things that we eat, in particular greens, red meats, legumes. Those are going to be your highest sources of iron. And again, if you're putting in small amounts of these throughout the day, you're going to get what you need, and your body can convert it very easily into usable iron. If not, or if we're working with someone who's very low in iron, then we'll usually supplement. I prefer not to supplement with iron because that can kind of bring its own little challenges, but so we do try to start with food first. There's a couple different sources of iron. There's hemi and there's non-hemi iron. And so hemi comes from meat sources, which is kind of your complete form of iron. It's the most easiest for your body to utilize and absorb, and the non-hemi iron comes from plant sources. These aren't as easy for the body to convert, usually needs a little help. So if you're dealing with someone who's a vegetarian or a very picky eater, or someone who is low in iron, you want to try and combine non-hemi and hemi sources together, because that really makes for an optimal absorption of iron. So you want to do like vitamin C with a protein. So one of my favorite examples would be like a spinach salad with strawberries and grilled chicken or grilled flank steak, which sounds pretty amazing. But that has some really good absorption qualities to it. When I'm working with an athlete, and this is just kind of a rule of thumb for any of you that might be working with the younger athletes that might need assistance with determining what they need as far as calorie needs go, kind of a general rule of thumb is really just 30 calories per kilogram of body mass, and then we want to add on any activity that they're presently doing. So we do want to make sure we're fueling the athlete, in particular when I'm working with someone, I'm always fueling their muscle mass predominantly. So again, sometimes we need to take in an activity factor into consideration in addition to what types of exercise or training are they actually doing. So this just provides kind of an easy rule of thumb way of determining what that athlete might need. And then there's better ways of determining that as well by using different calculations. I know for me, I'm looking at the entire athlete and I'm looking at their body composition primarily and working from there. I'm also looking at their metabolic rate on different levels. I'm kind of looking at their lifestyle in general. So a lot of things can determine what an athlete actually needs when it comes to calories. As I mentioned, fluid needs are extremely important for the adolescent athlete in particular. And hydration truly starts in the morning, and this is true really for anybody. So right away, when you or your young athlete wake up in the morning, you do want to take in about 12 to 16 ounces of water right away. And this is because we are actually dehydrated overnight. So we want to make sure that that's happening. And then basically you want to be taking in about that same amount, 12 to 16, well, every 1.5 to 2 hours leading up to an event. Before training or before events, then you're looking at about 10 to 14 ounces of water before, about an hour before, and about really 6 to 10 ounces about 15 minutes before as well. And then during events, ideally about 4 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes is what you're looking for. After training, it depends on if the athlete you're working with is a heavy sweater or not, but typically you want to take in about 2 cups of water for every pound that's lost through that training event. So monitoring fluid needs with the young athlete, maybe using a personalized water bottle, setting them up that they need to refill this, X amount of time. If we want to really fine-tune things, then you always want to weigh your athlete before and after. So as I mentioned before, we know how much we have to refuel them as far as fluid goes. Always want to increase your fluids in hotter weather. I usually recommend too that we're giving kids during hotter weather too snacks that are a little saltier actually, because it helps maintain fluid levels within, because they don't have a very good sweat mechanism at this age. Avoiding caffeine for sure, because that is more dehydrating than anything. Sometimes using some sort of flavored drink can be more palatable for the young athlete, or diluting some drinks just so there's some flavor in there. They're more likely to drink it then, is what I mean. And then utilizing more watery fruits is also very helpful. So children produce more heat relative to their body mass for the same type of exercise as we do, which sets them up for high risk for a lot of reasons. Children also have a lower cardiac output for any given metabolic level as well. So there's just a lot of pressure on them, and their bodies are working extra hard. So exercise is just very stressful in general. So, children also have a higher threshold before they actually begin to sweat too. So that's why sweat rates aren't all that great for when we're working with the adolescent athlete. And also sweating capacity is considerably lower in children. So it does reduce their ability to dissipate body heat by evaporation, which means, again, we want to make sure that they're that they're retaining a little water too to help keep that body cooled down. They also take a little longer to acclimate to hot and humidity too. So especially in this environment, I think of the kids playing soccer and stuff. It's hard when we have Wisconsin weather, which can be freezing one day and a gazillion degrees the next. So it's hard to kind of help that body actually acclimate. But typically they say that it takes about 2 weeks for a child to acclimate to any weather changes. As mentioned, core body temperature does increase a little bit more so in children as well. And again, that just leads for them to have more dehydration and a lot easier than we would. Different things to look out for too when you are dealing with a young athlete as far as dehydration and maybe any heat disorders go. So looking at heat cramps would be kind of your first sign that there's an issue starting, to heat exhaustion, to heat stroke. And so you can see how the symptoms kind of escalate from there. So preventing heat problems, if you are training a younger athlete, hopefully we're training them when it's the cooler part of the day. We want to increase time and intensity slowly when we're working in hot weather. Making sure they're wearing the right clothing is also really helpful too, and making sure too that we're scheduling regular water breaks. There's also a minimum amount of water that you want to make sure they're taking in, and set that goal for the child so they can take responsibility for their own hydration. And then just making sure that you're monitoring any symptoms as well. So when we're looking at pre-competition meals, the goal of that is to always prevent hunger, typically during an event. It also helps to fuel muscles and provide energy. Right before an event, you always want to make sure that you're consuming or feeding the child more carbohydrate. And we add protein and we add fat the further away from the event that we're doing. So as I mentioned before, adding in that carbohydrate, especially right before the event too, is also going to aid in maintaining hydration, which is great. Timing meals are also very important, so we want to make sure that the child is eating at least 2 hours before competition begins. And depending on the type of composition or training or event, you want to have them eat something about 20 minutes before as well. So 1 to 2 hours before, you're looking at things that are very easy to digest. Again, we're just kind of tapping off or topping off the carbohydrate stores within the muscles. So things that digest very easy and that can get into the muscle tissue very easy too. And so just kind of listed some different things on there. And I just have to point out that I do have Pop-Tarts on this list, but I'm slightly embarrassed that I actually have that on there. But I will say that there's a time and a place for all food, and yeah, right before an event, that could actually work. 2 to 3 hours before an event, then your meals are going to get a little bit more complex. So that's what I was saying before. Then we can add some proteins, we can add some fats in for the child too, because that actually helps sustain energy levels right up until the point of competition. So again, we're adding in lean meats at this point, peanut butters, yogurt, so more complex things 3 hours before. And this is just a listing of what some typical meals could look like for the adolescent athlete 3 to 4 hours prior to an event. So both examples for morning and PM. For all-day competitions, I find that most of my clients struggle with this more often than not. So it's important that we always have things on hand, things that can be portable, things that don't need to be refrigerated. I feel there's a lot of options that are on the market now too, but trying to stick with more whole food as possible is always the way to go. So, bagels and bananas, fruit juices that you want to dilute. Muffins sometimes, if they're smaller. Pretzels are great, as I mentioned, because of the sodium factor to that too. So granola bars are always great. I'm a huge fan of Cliff Bars as well, because those are just specifically designed to break down so easy, so nobody has any cramping issues. But this is very important for events, especially when there's like a half-hour break before the next one. It's important that we're refueling with both fluid and food. Recovery meals are also essential, really for any athlete, but again, this is an area that I find too that most athletes, doesn't matter your age, kind of stumble with a little bit. But especially for an adolescent, they're not always hungry right afterwards, after a big event, and so it's really important that they do take something in. And because we're also looking at rehydrating them too, I'm kind of a really big fan of having like smoothies around where you can blend up fruits. You can add a little bit of protein powder in there. That would be the only time I would suggest that, just to get something in their system to kind of get that recovery started for them too. So it's really important that they're taking in carbohydrate as well as some protein right afterwards. And really, when it comes down to protein, you only need about 12 to 20 grams of protein post event. Nothing more than that. Anything more than that can actually hinder the recovery process. So those muscles can't recover quite as quickly. And then it's also important that 2 hours afterwards, they're taking in another substantial meal as well. So recovery is something that most people kind of slack at a little bit, and they don't realize how important it is. If one has to recover or eat any fast food, this is just kind of a list of things that can work for that. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because I'm not a huge fan, but the list is there for you. When we're dealing with an adolescent athlete who either needs to lose weight or gain weight, we always want to do that in any sort of off season. This is just kind of a sensitive area in general. And so when we're working with, say, an overweight athlete, we want to make sure too that we are, engaging the RD, engaging the MD in the process. I think it's really important to help set the example for the adolescent athlete too. So they're going to want to do whatever you're doing. So it's really important that you kind of set the bar for what you want to see them doing. In particular, not using food as a reward too. And I think as younger athletes and just kids in general, there can be a lot of that. So we want to watch out for that. Helping the child maybe just increase their usual activity, so not necessarily structured activity, but how can they just move more in the course of their day? Cutting out any empty calories, or at least cutting back on some of those empty calories. So again, you're helping create a balance for them as well. Eating slower is also a really, really big deal, so I highly encourage helping the child do that as well. If you are working with someone that is underweight, it is important that they're eating very often. So preferably eating every 2 hours is what's going to be essential. When working with children like this, they can start gaining weight very nicely, but they can drop just as quickly because 1 or 2 days they kind of got off their schedule. So it's really important that we are supporting that for them. So really having them eat every 2 hours is going to be ideal, and it can be a mixed blend of carbohydrate and protein and fat, but just making sure that that's happening on a very consistent basis. As I mentioned, we'll talk briefly on supplements. So always recommending food first, clearly. And really, there are numerous studies out there saying food is essentially the best versus any type of supplement that could potentially be out there. And I feel as if high school kids are more exposed to potential supplement usage than anyone under high school, but it is definitely around. It's very helpful, though, that when you are working with an athlete that they do have the support that they need, so that they are working with the trainer, they are working with the RD, they are working with an MD. Everyone knows what's going on, and we all have this plan for that child. That will help them see results that they need without it. As we know, the supplement industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's not going away either. And the claims are really, they're just trying to sell fantasies, if you will, but they're not always up to par. So this is a list of just some NCAA regulations, and I feel as if these are really good for really anybody to adhere to when we're working with adolescent sports in particular. So what's also very interesting here is that what is permissible is energy bars that have less than 30% protein. So if they have more than 30% protein, apparently that's considered more of a supplement that is not considered okay. So that's also important to note too. As you'll see, this list of not permissible items to use, protein powders do line up on there because there's so much discretion with there's so many tainted powders that are out there. I was just working with a young athlete the other day, and she was telling me about this protein powder she was using, and I thought, well, that's fine. So, well, where'd you get it? She's like, bodybuilding.com, and I'm like, boo! Get rid of it now, hurry, fast. So I forget that there's so much of that out there. So typically, the NCAA are looking at eliminating any type of stimulant, anabolic agent, diuretics, steroid drugs, peptide hormones. You can go to their website to find out a little bit more. Whenever I'm working with an athlete of any age, though, if we do have to supplement because it's just their lifestyle or we have other needs we're trying to take care of, I always refer to the NSF for Sport website. This is an excellent tool for anybody truly to refer to. The supplements that they do suggest on there have been through a rigorous form of studies to make sure that they are at its purest form. So then if anyone gets tested for something, that, they're going to come out just fine. So just to summarize everything up, again, it's important that we're eating as much of a varied diet as possible to make sure we're taking in all the nutrition that we need. There is a strong importance for maintaining hydration levels. We talked about what those guidelines are. Making sure that we're not missing out on the pregame and the recovery nutrition, and making sure you have enough for those all-day events as well, and preferably avoiding supplementation. So, thank you.